A note told them when to swallow the capsules. Two electronics technicians climbed a hill above Niterói carrying lead-eye masks, raincoats, and a bottle of water. Days later, they were found dead under the open sky. And if you only know the alien version of this case, you're missing the most unsettling part, because once you look at the note, the timing, and the masks, this starts feeling a lot less like folklore and a lot more like something terrifyingly human. I'm Arturo, and this is Latin Lorda, from Latin America's history to mysteries and true crime to local legends, whispering Latin intrigue. Hit subscribe. Fresh revelations drop every week, ready for your next campfire debate. Two electronics technicians climbed a hill above Niterói carrying raincoats, a bottle of mineral water, and crude lead pieces meant to cover their eyes. Days later, they were found dead under the open sky, beside a note that read like the last page of a ritual manual: arrive at the agreed place, swallow the capsules, wait for the signal, mask. The ambiguous scene and unexplained details invite curiosity and deepen the mystery surrounding their deaths. To feel this case properly, you have to start with the city beneath the hill. August 1966, before the bridge. Before Niterói was folded into the long urban blur around Guanabara Bay, from the water it rose in layers: ferry docks, clerks, mechanics, officemen, sailors moving between Rio and the state capital across the bay, low commercial streets, apartment blocks, and then neighborhoods climbing towards scrub and rock. This city's unique blend of modernity and unfinished charm provides a rich cultural backdrop that deepens the mystery surrounding the technicians' deaths. That geography matters. Some places hide their mysteries in alleys. Niterói hid them where the paved world lost confidence. The land folded upward fast. Roads became paths. Houses thinned. Brush and boulder took over. Morro do Vintém stood in that borderland, close enough to reach in an afternoon, far enough to feel like another jurisdiction of reality. 1 minute you were in the ordinary traffic of the bay. A short climb later, you were above it, looking down at a world that still believed it understood itself. And belief was everywhere in Brazil, not only in church pews and family altars, but in radio shops, repair benches, spiritist circles, magazine rumors, and the mid-century dream that science and the invisible might yet shake hands. Niterói's blend of faith and modernity makes the case feel rooted in human fears and hopes about forces beyond understanding, encouraging reflection on our relationship with the unknown. That was the city below the hill when Miguel José Viana and Manuel Pereira da Cruz arrived from Campos dos Goytacazes. Miguel was 34, Manuel was 32. They were not drifters, not thrill seekers, not boys chasing rumors. They were technicians, men trusted to open up stubborn devices and make them behave again. They understood components, circuits, and the discipline of procedure. In another story, that practical competence might have protected them from foolishness. In this one, it may have made the impossible seem methodical enough to try. On August 17, 1966, they left Campos and traveled toward Niterói under the cover of ordinary business. Some reports say they told relatives they were going to São Paulo to buy a car and electronic equipment. To family, the trip sounded like work: parts to buy, technical matters to handle, equipment to look for. That explanation fit their lives so neatly that nobody had reason to pull at it. Maybe it was true at the beginning. Maybe it was only true enough to keep questions asleep. What matters is that two working men walked out of the familiar world wearing the face of routine, and routine is the best disguise a mystery can ask for. The day only became strange when people looked backward through death. Purchases that would have meant nothing in real time hardened into clues once the men were gone. They bought raincoats. They bought mineral water. A witness later remembered one of them checking his watch with the nervous precision of someone afraid of missing a time that mattered. But memory, especially after a scandal, is never as steady as people want it to be. The solid part is simpler. They arrived, acquired a few practical things, and by evening they were on Morro do Vintém. What happened after that is when the timeline begins to fray. By August 20th, according to the version repeated most often, a local boy up on the hill, flying a kite in some tellings, hunting birds in others, came across the bodies. The men were lying close together, or nearly so, already touched by decomposition in the August heat. They were well dressed. The raincoats were on them or near them, depending on which report survived. The lead masks, those objects that gave the case its name, were found with them, on them, or by their faces, depending on who told it later. Some speculate they might have been part of a secret experiment, a ritual, or a cover-up, adding layers to the ongoing debate about what truly transpired. That uncertainty is not a flaw in the story. It is part of the story. When the record is damaged, Legend rushes in to paint over the cracks. Even the money becomes slippery. Some retellings say cash was still there. Others are less firm and leave us only with a stronger impression. The scene did not read like a clean robbery. There were no obvious wounds of rage, no clear signs of a struggle, no ordinary choreography of a quarrel gone bad. Whatever happened on that hill looked less like chaos than an appointment kept too faithfully. And then there was the note. Small, plain, almost dismissive in its brevity. In the most common version, it ordered the men to be at the agreed place by 4:30 in the afternoon. At 6:30, ingest capsules. After the effect, protect metals. Await signal, mask. That was all. No farewell, no explanation, no name. Its clinical tone suggests a deliberate, perhaps ritualistic, procedure, prompting questions about whether it was a human experiment, a supernatural ritual, or something else entirely, inviting reflection on the human need for order and chaos. Wait, notice what the note does not say. It does not say who chose the place. It does not say what the capsules were. It does not say what kind of signal the men expected, or why the mask came at the end, as if the last step was not death but preparation. In that silence, whole generations have thrown in extraterrestrials, spirit guides, secret rays, and every shining lie that the sky can borrow. But the sky is an easy suspect. The sky never has to testify. The ground does, and the ground kept only stubbornly human evidence. So let us trim away the noise. There is no reliable proof that aliens killed Miguel and Manuel. There is no solid evidence that a craft landed on Morro do Vintém. There is no reason to imagine the lead masks as some advanced machine from another world. That is the junk mythology people pour into any case that arrives with mystery already built into its objects. The truth here is stranger in a harder way. The things left behind are handmade, improvised, local, ordinary in their materials, and therefore much more revealing than any story about visitors from the stars. The masks matter because they were so crude. Popular memory loves to turn them into sleek helmets from a science fiction dream, but they were nothing like that. They were rough pieces of sheet lead cut by hand into shapes meant to cover the eyes. No eye holes, no polished finish. Not instruments for seeing, but for shielding, or for what their makers believed shielding should look like. That detail is everything. These were not devices of vision. They were devices of protection against brightness, glare, a force, or perhaps a ritual idea of force. And here, the case begins to take on its most grounded form. If the men thought they were facing real radiation, those masks were pathetic protection. A little lead over the eyes would not save anyone from a serious radiological event. But if they expected a flash, a blinding light, or some invisible phenomenon dressed up in scientific language, then the masks start to make rough human sense. And if they were part symbolic, part practical, a costume for a ritual pretending to be an experiment, then they make even more sense than that. That possibility would not have sounded absurd in Brazil in the 1960s. The country held countless corners where spiritists practiced practical trades, radio enthusiasm, and semi-scientific language sat comfortably at the same table. The phrase often circling this case is scientific spiritism, that old hope that invisible worlds could be approached with measured steps. Time this, swallow that, shield yourself, wait for the sign. To us it may sound like confusion. To the men caught inside it, it may have sounded disciplined, modern, almost responsible. Belief loves to borrow precision's voice. That may be the cruelest thing about this story. Miguel and Manuel did not have to choose between being technicians and being believers. They could be both in the same breath. In fact, their technical habits made the whole performance feel safer. A timetable looks serious, a capsule looks measured, a mask looks prepared. Procedure has a way of calming fear, even when the procedure is foolish, incomplete, or borrowed from someone who has no idea what he is doing. The very instincts that help them repair broken devices may have made a dangerous idea feel like a manageable experiment. The official investigation never truly caught up to them. By the time the bodies were examined, decomposition had already smudged the most important traces. The doctors did not uncover a bullet, a knife wound, or any decisive trauma that could slam the case shut. Whatever toxicology was attempted never gave the police a clean answer they could hold up to daylight. No single poison stepped forward and confessed. No disease settled the matter. The cause of death remained undetermined, and the moment that happened, the hill stopped being a crime scene and became a legend factory. Here is the pivot that keeps this case alive even now. Once the body refuses to speak clearly, everyone else starts speaking too much. If the examination had found a common sedative, the story would have shrunk. If it had found cyanide, the investigation would have taken a harder criminal shape. If it had found a natural medical event, much of the paranormal smoke would have drifted away. Instead, the medical silence left the note, the masks, and the capsules standing alone in the wind. That is more than enough for folklore. It is not enough for certainty. So what can be said without lying? The leading grounded reading is that Miguel and Manuel went up that hill to carry out some planned experiment, ritual test, or technical spiritual procedure, and that the capsules were central to whatever they expected to happen. That is not the same as saying the case is solved. It is not. It is simply the explanation that best fits the surviving objects. The note mentions capsules explicitly. The scene shows no strong sign of force. The masks imply anticipation, not ambush. The whole arrangement leans towards something willingly attempted, but willingly attempted under whose influence? That is the knife edge. One possibility is that the men devised the plan themselves or copied it from people in their circle. In that version, the case becomes a fatal miscalculation. They swallow something they believe will trigger a necessary state, vision, contact, purification, some doorway of perception, wait for the effect, prepare the masks, and die before the revelation arrives. It would not be an ordinary suicide. It would be closer to experimental self-endangerment, the kind born from confidence, secrecy, and a terrible faith in procedure. The other possibility is darker precisely because it is so human. Someone else may have supplied the instructions, the capsules, or both. Not an alien pilot, not a ghost in the sky, a person, a guide, a leader, a friend, an amateur mystic, a manipulator, a fool with too much influence over trusting men. In that version, the deaths begin to smell less like private error and more like persuasion, negligence, or design. The note's cold tone feeds that suspicion. Be at the agreed place. Await signal. Those are the words of compliance, not improvisation. And yet, suspicion is not proof. The records never produced the decisive bridge between theory and fact. No poison was conclusively identified and traced to a supplier. No witness emerged who could place a planner on the hill at the critical moment. No confession arrived. No clean chain of evidence turned a shadow into a name. That is why anyone who tells this case as a solved murder is overreaching. Homicide remains possible at the edge of the frame. Fatal manipulation remains possible too. But possibility is not the same thing as closure, and closure never came to Morro do Vintém. There is another trap here, and people fall into it all the time. Because the scene looked quiet when the bodies were found. Later retellings start imagining a mystical, peaceful passing, as if the men lay down under the sky and drifted out of the world. Real death is rarely that polite. A poisoning, overdose, seizure, arrhythmia, collapse, or violent drug reaction can leave far less theatrical evidence than crime stories have trained us to expect, especially after days of heat and exposure. What looked calm in hindsight may have been ugly, frightening, and painfully ordinary in the final minutes. The hill did half the myth-making on its own. Morro do Vintém stood close enough to the city to feel reachable, far enough from supervision to feel private, and high enough to turn ordinary lights into omens. From up there, the bay spread out like a promise of order below, ferries cutting water, offices opening, radios humming, repair shops doing business, people keeping time. But on the slope, silence took over. Hills have always done this to human beings. They lift you just far enough above the world that revelation starts feeling like a practical destination. That is one reason the flying saucer stories attach themselves so easily. Brazil already had its sky rumors, its strange lights, its newspaper hunger for the marvelous. Once two dead technicians with lead masks entered the public imagination, every luminous tale in the region wanted to move into the empty rooms of the case. Some people later spoke of unusual lights around the time of the deaths. Maybe they truly believed what they saw, but even sincere witnesses do not fix the central problem. A light in the sky does not identify the capsules. It does not write the note. It does not explain the masks. So strip the story back to the earth. Two technicians travel under the guise of an ordinary pretext. They buy a few practical items. They reach a predetermined place. A note tells them when to swallow capsules. Crude lead coverings are waiting for their eyes. Later, they are found dead without obvious external violence, and the medical examination cannot tell the world exactly why. Everything supernatural begins after those facts. None of it explains those facts better than the human possibilities do. This case is no less eerie when you remove the aliens. It becomes more intimate and therefore more frightening, because now the story stops being about monsters and starts being about us, about the old human habit of mistaking procedure for truth, about how easily a timetable can masquerade as wisdom, about how dangerous it is when partial scientific language wraps itself around longing, faith, and secrecy. The mask's case feels exotic from a distance, but up close, it is painfully familiar. Competent people can walk themselves into disaster while believing they are being careful. Trust can kill, so can borrowed jargon. So can the desire to touch something larger than yourself and return with proof. That is why the men's appearance matters so much. They did not climb dressed for panic. They climbed dressed for the purpose. Even in the damaged reports, that feeling survives. There is order everywhere you look. The trip, the purchases, the meeting place, the timed instructions, the masks prepared in advance. The whole scene suggests a sequence more than an interruption, and that may be the coldest detail of all. They have not stumbled into the dark. They seem to have walked toward it, believing they knew the steps. Few things are more haunting than organized vulnerability. But the sequence breaks exactly where we need it most. We know there was an appointment, but we don't know who said it. We know there were capsules, but we don't know what they contained. We know the note says protect metals, but not whether that meant watches, instruments, body-worn objects, or some private language from a circle now lost. We know they expected a signal, but the word signal is dangerous in the mouths of men who understood radio and also believed the universe might answer back. Every piece points toward context. Every piece refuses to keep that context alive. That is why the note still grips the imagination. It feels solvable. It sounds as if one missing conversation, one forgotten witness, one last page from the manual would unlock everything. Usually, that feeling is a trap. In unsolved cases, the missing context is often gone forever, buried with the people who needed it. What remains is a fragment precise enough to torment us and incomplete enough to survive. The note does exactly that. It whispers a method. It leaves only silence. It promises a signal and delivers nothing, but the echo of instructions followed too far. Meanwhile, the city below kept moving, because cities always do. Ferries crossed the bay. Newspapers landed on counters. Repair shops opened their shutters. Office workers went home. Families repeated rumors at the dinner table. And little by little, uncertainty hardened into legend, because legend is easier to carry than doubt. A city can live with a ghost story. It struggles more with the possibility that two ordinary working men died in the gap between belief and evidence, between trust and manipulation, between a hilltop promise and the body's blunt refusal to cooperate. So when people ask what happened on Morro du Vintém, the honest answer is smaller and harsher than the legends. No proven visitors from the stars, no confirmed death ray from the sky, no neat villain stepping out of the scrub to satisfy the movies. Only two real men, a real note, real masks, the instruction to ingest capsules, and a record too damaged to finish the sentence. The story's strongest shape is human. Whether that human shape was a fatal mistake, someone else's deadly script, or a third thing the evidence lost, the Hill has never told us. And maybe that is why the case still refuses to die. It sits right on the fault line between method and longing, between the language of science and the hunger for revelation. The note promised a signal. The only undeniable signal was death, and even that arrived without explanation. Muchas gracias. Thanks for trekking the hidden trails of Latin America with me. If tonight's story unsettled you, subscribe and ring the bell because Latin America's most intriguing stories are far from over.